For folks who are listening in who may not know, just want to note that AARP is nonpartisan. We don't endorse candidates and we don't give money to candidates, but we spend a lot of time tracking where the candidates stand on key issues. And as you noted, polling our members to see what issues matter the most to them. Our membership is 50 plus, but we work on a lot of issues that impact people over 50 and their families. And this election cycle, we've been working with pollsters on both sides of the aisle to not only do some national polling, which is trending, not surprisingly, very similarly to what Bruce shared, but we've also, we're in the midst of polling in 10 important battleground states this cycle, both for the US Senate, but also key governors races. And I will definitely put a link to all of the polls in the chat. So if folks are interested in some of these states, they can take a look. We've polled in Florida,
and
Georgia.
Just really quickly, Lori, also if there's questions as Lori's going along, if you'd post them in the chat, I'll keep track of them. So we'll be able to come back to Lori to answer them. Go ahead. Thank you, Lori. Keep going.
That's great. So we've done polling in Florida, Georgia, New Hampshire. Well, New Hampshire's coming. Maine, we just released Wisconsin, Arizona, Alaska, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. So a wide range of states. We actually spoke to voters 18 and older, but oversampled for people over 50. And in some states, we also oversampled African American, Black, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian American Pacific Islanders to get a sense of any differences with those groups. And then Dee also mentioned our She's the Difference effort, which is tracking women. We've done polling with women and also focus groups to look at the issues that matter most to them. Not surprisingly, I'm sure, jobs in the economy and inflation are really top of mind as folks are looking at this election cycle. Big issues as they're thinking about their choice for governor, but also for US Senate. The numbers were even higher for women, for 50 plus women who have a lot of concerns. Our latest polling also shows that there's still a large group of women who are undecided right now as we look to November. And so there's still an opportunity to lay out an agenda that will be important to them. In the inflation and prices area, housing costs, food costs, and healthcare have all been key issues of concern as folks are really struggling. And we've seen, even for folks who would view themselves as middle income or higher middle income, if you're raising a family and you're having to go to the grocery store for multiple kids, we're all seeing those challenges. So I think those really are going to be key as we look at what will be happening next year across the country in state legislatures. I will note that in a few places, and it depends on the state, but interestingly enough, in our Michigan poll, abortion was the top issue that showed up in looking at the governor's race, followed by a very close second on jobs or on inflation, I'm sorry. And then in places like Nevada and Arizona, we see issues around immigration, voting rights, really trending higher. And that may not come as a surprise either, given the part of the country that we're looking at. But again, overall, those key issues around the economy are front and center.
Lori, explain why the top issue matters in a midterm election, because I want to make sure folks understand what the connection is there and why that matters.
Well, you know, I also should have noted, Dee, that we know that older Americans vote in high numbers, but our polling shows across the country, in our national polling and in these states, voters over 50 are highly motivated to turn out in this midterm election. And you often will see your numbers a little bit lower in these off-year elections. But they, again, similar to what Bruce found, folks are very concerned about the direction of the country. They're hurting, and so they are highly motivated to show up. And so if you aren't addressing, if you're running and you're not addressing these key issues, it could be an issue this election cycle for you.
Yeah. And particularly, you know, in midterms, it's always been my observation that whoever wins, whoever gets their group to show up. And so when you say abortion's the #1 issue in Michigan, to me, that has real implication about the shape of the electorate that's going to show up in Michigan. And that's what's so interesting about this election is clearly inflation and economy are big issues, but there are a lot of other wedge issues that are going to stimulate turnout in key races.
Well, that's a really, absolutely, you've got the dynamic in Michigan, and that was true in the general, across the general population, but also in the African-American Black population in Michigan.
Yeah.
You see voting rights, which is not a surprise when in the polling, in the oversample we did with African-American Blacks in Georgia, given what we saw during the presidential election and the controversy there. So you are seeing, especially when you look at the subgroups, some key issues on top of inflation that really could make a difference in some of these places, in some of these states. So, as a nonpartisan organization with members that across the political spectrum, these are interesting times, that's for sure. I think, you know, but on our core issues, when we're talking about the health and financial security of older Americans, we find there's a lot of agreement. You know, I'll talk about the state legislative work, but, you know, on issues like protecting Social Security and the importance of Medicare across party lines, we know, and we've seen this in our polling, that those issues truly matter, and older Americans want to see those Medicare protected, their Social Security protected, especially given the large number of Americans who rely solely on Social Security for their income. But it's been interesting as the Supreme Court has had some of its decisions around abortion, around gun rights, which are issues that are not our issues. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, how do we make sure our issues are front and center. Raising awareness with folks who are running as part of that, these polls that we've done to really show that there are bigger issues. And so that's why we have quite a broad agenda. You know, we are looking at where we can help save our members money. We look at issues that we know are important across the aisle that will have an impact. We're doing a lot of work, and Aaron mentioned all of the federal money flowing to states. So you've seen a lot of tax cuts across the country. We've seen state budgets in better shape than they had been, even with the economy and largely in the shape it's been. So there are real opportunities, I think, as Aaron noted, to move the work there. So, you know, we're working across the country with state governments actually on the opportunity to bring down federal grants for broadband expansion. This is a hugely important work. It's important for dealing with social isolation. It's important that we start to get broadband into rural communities. It's also important for healthcare, but older Americans make up a large number of our small business owners. And so having strong high-speed internet is important for that. So, you know, we really do have a set of issues that have crossed the spectrum. We look to keep, this is an issue we saw in some of the state polling, and goes in with higher costs, but utility rates and impacts of fuel costs, and whether it's air conditioning in the summer for our southern states, or, you know, I'm in Maine, really looking at fuel costs in the winter. You know, we looking at opportunities to make sure that rates are fair and affordable. And again, it's not just for our members, but you know, for our members that may own a small business. I mean, it goes across into that space. And so I could go on for a while, but I'll stop there. I mean, we do see a place where we can show up on, and especially as we look at those top priorities where we can weigh in from a consumer perspective and be having those conversations with legislators or governors on both sides of the aisle.
And Lori, I want to follow up on that because you hit on something I notice. It's interesting how the wedge issues get the most attention, but they're not necessarily the ones that the large majority of Americans in the middle are most concerned about. The number 2 issue on that list that Bruce showed us was healthcare. You don't hear healthcare being talked about much at all in this midterm election. But the specific question to you is, how do you get the attention of legislators and state leaders to focus on those issues when they're not the red meat issues out there? I mean, what are some of the tactics that AARP is doing to make that happen?
Sure. So AARP has offices in every state and the territories, and our state offices have advocacy staff as well as volunteers. And so, we take our voter engagement work very seriously. It's not just about making sure our members know where the candidates stand on the issues, but making sure the candidates understand what the key issues are for our members and all older people 50 plus in any state. We spend time, we meet with candidates, we do voter guides. We have published through AARP Bulletin on the editorial side, voter guides for every state, not only on the issues, but also because there have been so many voting changes in state legislatures, some promoting an expansion of voting access, some where we've seen a bit of a retrenchment, making sure folks just know how to vote. And then as soon as turnover, you've got these opportunities where you have a lot of legislative turnover at the state level, but it also means a re-education. And so being upfront and proactive about outreach to newly elected leaders on what our key priorities are, and really continuing those conversations, looking for opportunities to be part of that educational process that a lot of state legislatures have. But I can't say enough about the importance of that outreach and storytelling that really highlights those issues that are really critical to people and impacting their lives, especially right now. And some of the economic stories are just pretty depressing, quite honestly. There are a lot of folks who are really struggling. And so really trying to put those front and center, even though they may not be the splashy issues that show up in the newspaper. Interestingly, in our polling, and I did focus more on, as I was reviewing the state polls on the gubernatorial issues, just because we were talking about state legislatures, but it wasn't as high. So, but of course, when you ask folks about their choice for U.S. Senate, protecting Medicare is top of mind. So, so that remains important. We're thrilled with the fact that Medicare will now be able to negotiate prescription drug prices. It'll be a little bit of a rollout here, but that has been an issue we've been working on for a very long time. And in some more recent polling we did that wasn't specifically related to the election, the feedback on that was very positive from older Americans. Their prescription drug costs tie right into the fact that they're struggling to make ends meet across every aspect of their lives. And so now the fight continues to make sure that the program remains strong and solvent and that folks can access the healthcare they need. And then you also have, for those 50 to 64, the public health emergency was extended, which is positive for those who got extra relief at the state level through the state federal Medicaid program for folks who lost their jobs, who are really struggling. But there's still more work to be done. And of course, you see, depending on what state you're in, you see differences in terms of what's happening in the healthcare arena. But again, it can be it isn't an issue that traditionally makes the headlines, but it's hugely important and has huge impacts on overall retirement security if folks can't get their healthcare costs under control. And I just quickly, Dee, wanted also to mention on this issue of folks coming together or not, this was really interesting. As divided and as strongly as people feel about their view of things, a majority of folks in our polling did say that they would much rather their elected official give a little and come to an agreement and a solution rather than just stand firm and have nothing get done. And so folks feel very strongly that we've got to do more to move the needle on key issues instead of just putting a line in the sand and saying we're not going to move. So this is an area that we've been really focused. We advocated strongly during the pandemic that we needed to make it as easy and safe for Americans to vote. We want folks to have as much access as possible to vote. And we did see in some places, we weighed in states where we've seen an expansion, states like Delaware, although there's a court case now in Delaware, so there's a lot up in the air there. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Maine, just to name a few other states where we work to expand access. We've got the challenges in Texas that made the news. You know, a lot of our concern is that where changes have been made, folks don't, there's a lot that goes into educating people to make sure they know and have the latest information, which is one of the reasons why we work so hard with secretaries of state across the country and our state offices to put out voting guides for people so that they could find that latest information. But you know, Aaron made this point. I think we're all going to be watching this cycle very closely when it comes to how people vote in anticipation of 2024 and where we may need to see additional changes. You know, I think you're going to see differences across different types of states. So it's something that we will continue to track and remain concerned about. But I think, and I will say one final thing, as I was looking when we were talking earlier, when I was looking across the states, there are still large numbers of folks in many states who are saying they're either going to vote early or vote by mail. I think for some folks, they found it really convenient. You know, they came out of COVID and said, why, this was just great. You know, I'm one of those folks who loves, if I can, to go. I love the process of going, you know, on election day to my polling place, but more and more we are seeing folks like this option. And so we'll see. More to be determined. I think Aaron was right on. Our polling that we've just done in the states asked some horse race questions. I think ours was the first poll that for Florida that had Rubio behind. I mean, so you have these weird things that happen. And you know, they're a point in time. That's what people love. I mean, that's where people go. It's like they, you know, forget the long list of issues. And so really, you know, we spend a lot of time also just trying to get those issues front and center as well. But for us, you know, we've got large sample sizes. We were doing 1,200 folks for these. You know, we really like bringing in pollsters from both sides of the aisle when we do this work. And on an ongoing basis, we're reaching out to our members and are talking to our members. So we have a lot of data points to what Aaron said over time, where the issues are concerned. And really, but it can take, again, it can take a lot to break through the candidate noise to make sure that those issues are front and center. I'm kind of, I'm with Aaron. I'm more focused. I think what I found really interesting in our state polls as we looked at the breakdowns for the Hispanic Latino audience and African American Black, were how some of those other more contentious issues did pop. And so the question for me is how they could impact some of these state races. And so I think there could be an interesting story there. I also think as I look at our She's the Difference polling and the importance of women, the economic issue, the abortion issue, I don't have a good prediction, but I think that there could be some interesting results from that. And I'm just so curious to see how it's going to play out.